The saloon door swung open, and Elias Crow saw what everyone else had learned to ignore. A child sitting in the shadows like a ghost no one wanted to claim. She couldn't have been more than 7, her dress hanging in tatters, her eyes fixed on nothing at all. 3 years, they said. 3 years she'd been wandering Dustfall Crossing, and not a single soul had done more than toss her scraps. Elias told himself to turn away, to keep riding like he'd been doing for the past 2 years. But when the ranch hands started laughing and one of them reached for her arm, something inside him that he thought had died came roaring back to life. Welcome to a story about the power of one choice to change 2 lives forever. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what you're about to hear is a tale of redemption, courage, and the family we choose when the world turns its back. The Montana Territory had a way of swallowing men whole. Elias Crow knew this better than most. He'd watched it happen to his brother, to his father, to friends whose names he couldn't bear to speak aloud anymore. The land out here didn't forgive weakness, and it sure as hell didn't forgive grief. So Elias had learned to keep moving, to let the wind scrub away the memories that clung to him like grave dirt, to never stay anywhere long enough for the past to catch up. Dustfall Crossing wasn't even supposed to be a stop. Just a place to water his horse, maybe pick up supplies if the general store had anything worth buying. The town had that half-dead look that settlements got when the gold ran out or the railroad passed them by. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like tired old men, their paint peeling in long gray strips. The main street was nothing but rutted mud and horse droppings, and the few people Elias passed kept their eyes down, their expressions carefully blank. The kind of town where people minded their own business because they had too many secrets to risk asking questions. The saloon sat at the far end of the street, its sign hanging crooked from rusted chains. Elias tied his horse to the hitching post and pushed through the doors, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The place smelled of stale beer, tobacco smoke, and something else, something sour and neglected that made his jaw tighten. A dozen men occupied the space, most of them hunched over tables with cards or whiskey or both. The bartender, a thick-necked man with a stained apron, barely glanced up when Elias approached. "Whiskey," Elias said, dropping a coin on the scarred wood. The bartender poured without comment, sliding the glass across with fingers that left greasy prints on the rim. Elias took the drink to a corner table, positioning himself with his back to the wall, an old habit that had kept him alive more times than he could count. He sipped slowly, letting the burn settle in his chest, and tried not to think about how many more towns like this one he'd passed through before he finally stopped running. That's when he saw her. At first he thought she was a trick of the light, a shadow that had somehow taken shape in the corner opposite his own. But when his eyes focused, he realized she was real. A child, small and painfully thin, sitting on the floor with her back pressed against the wall. Her dress, if you could call it that, was little more than rags stitched together, brown with old dirt and torn at the hem. Her feet were bare, the soles black with grime. Her hair hung in matted tangles around a face that should have been soft with youth but instead looked carved from stone. What struck Elias most was her stillness. She didn't fidget or play or move at all. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance, her small hands folded in her lap, like she'd learned that the safest thing to do was become invisible. Elias looked away, took another sip of whiskey. Not his problem, not his business. He'd made a promise to himself 2 years ago, standing over 2 fresh graves with dirt under his fingernails and a hole in his chest where his heart used to be. No more connections, no more caring. Caring got you killed, or worse, it got the people you loved killed while you watched helplessly. But his eyes kept drifting back to the corner, to the child who sat there like a piece of forgotten furniture. "You new here?" Elias turned to find an older man standing beside his table, his face weathered to leather by decades of sun and wind. He wore a deputy's star, though it looked more decorative than official, pinned to a vest that had seen better days. "Just passing through," Elias replied. The deputy nodded, his gaze following Elias's line of sight to the corner. "That's just Lena. Don't mind her. She don't bother nobody." "Oh, Lena," Elias repeated. "She got family?" "Not that anyone knows of. Been here about 3 years now, give or take. Showed up one day, wouldn't say where she came from, and nobody claimed her. Town feeds her when we remember to, lets her sleep in the back of the church sometimes. The deputy shrugged. Could be worse places for an orphan, I suppose. Elias felt something cold settle in his gut. 3 years? More or less. She was smaller then, maybe 4 or 5. Don't talk much. Some folks think she's simple. The deputy scratched his chin. Others think she just ain't got nothing worth saying. And nobody's tried to find out where she belongs? The deputy's expression hardened slightly. Mister, we got our own problems in Dustfall Crossing. Most folks here are barely keeping themselves fed. We do what we can, but we ain't got the resources to go chasing ghosts. Girl's alive, ain't she? That's more than some can say. The cold in Elias's gut turned to ice, but he kept his face neutral. The deputy was right in his way. This was frontier justice, harsh, practical, survival of the fittest. Sentiment was a luxury most people out here couldn't afford. Appreciate the information, Elias said. The deputy tipped his hat and moved away, leaving Elias alone with his whiskey and his thoughts. He should finish his drink, stock up on supplies, and ride out before sunset. He should keep his head down and his heart locked away where it couldn't betray him again. Instead, he found himself watching the girl, Lena, and remembering another child, another time. His daughter, Emily, had been 6 when the fever took her, 6 years old with dark curls and a laugh that could light up a room. She'd been afraid of storms, would crawl into bed between him and his wife Martha during thunder, her small body shaking until one of them wrapped her up safe. The fever had come fast. One day she was running through the meadow behind their homestead. The next she was burning up with heat that no amount of cold water could touch. Martha had sat beside Emily's bed for 3 days straight, holding her hand, whispering stories and prayers. Elias had ridden 20 miles for a doctor who arrived too late to do anything but shake his head and offer condolences that meant nothing. Emily died on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun came up. Martha followed her 6 weeks later, her heart simply giving out from grief. The doctor called it heart failure. Elias knew better. You could die from a broken heart just as sure as you could die from a bullet. He'd buried them both on the hill overlooking the meadow Emily loved, said words he didn't believe anymore, and then burned the homestead to the ground because he couldn't stand to look at it. Couldn't stand to see Emily's doll sitting on her bed, or Martha's apron hanging by the stove. Couldn't stand the emptiness that swallowed everything whole. So he'd started writing, and he hadn't stopped. The saloon door banged open, jerking Elias from his memories. A group of men strode in, 5 of them, still wearing their work clothes and spurs that jangled with each step. Ranch hands, by the look of them, the kind of men who worked hard and played harder, who spent their wages on whiskey and women and woke up broke and hungover every Sunday. The leader of the group was tall and broad-shouldered with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty around his mouth. He surveyed the room like he owned it, his eyes lighting on the bartender. "Whiskey for my boys, Carl. The good stuff. Not that rotgut you serve the drifters." Carl scrambled to comply, lining up glasses and pouring from a bottle he kept under the bar. The ranch hands claimed a table in the center of the room, their voices loud and boisterous, their laughter too sharp. Other patrons shifted away, creating space, and Elias recognized the dynamic immediately. These were men used to taking what they wanted, and this was a town that had learned not to fight back. For a while they drank and played cards, their voices rising as the whiskey flowed. Elias nursed his own drink and tried to ignore them, but something about the energy in the room had changed. The air felt tighter, charged with the kind of tension that came before violence. Then the tall one, the leader, stood up, swaying slightly. His gaze swept the room and landed on the corner where Lena sat. "Well now," he said, his words slurring just enough to be dangerous. "Looks like we got ourselves some entertainment." His companions turned to look, and Elias felt his muscles tense. "Come here, girl," the man called. "Come on over and say hello to Jake and his boys." Lena didn't move, didn't even look up. She might as well have been carved from stone. Jake's smile turned ugly. "I said, come here." Still nothing. The saloon had gone quiet, all conversations dying. Men looked down at their drinks or studied the walls, anywhere but at the corner where a child sat frozen in place. Jake started forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You deaf, girl? Or just stupid?" One of his friends laughed, high and nervous. Leave her alone, Jake. She ain't worth the trouble. Trouble? Jake stopped beside Lena, looming over her small form. I'm just being friendly, ain't I, little girl? He reached down and grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. Lena made no sound, but Elias saw her eyes go wide with terror, saw her body go rigid. And in that moment, something inside him broke clean through. All the walls he'd built, all the promises he'd made to himself, all the careful distance he'd maintained for 2 years. He stood up. The movement caught Jake's attention. He turned, still holding Lena's arm, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation. This ain't your concern, friend. Elias walked forward slowly, his hand hanging loose at his side, near but not touching the gun at his hip. He stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to be heard clearly. Let her go. Jake laughed, but there was an edge to it now. Or what? Or I'll make you wish you had. The room went completely still. Even the men at the card tables had stopped pretending not to watch. Jake's companions shifted uneasily, their hands moving toward their own weapons. 5 against 1. Bad odds by anyone's calculation. But Elias had stopped caring about odds a long time ago. Jake's eyes narrowed, assessing. He saw a lean man in dusty trail clothes, about 6 feet tall, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, and a face that had seen too much sun and too much sorrow. Nothing special, nothing worth backing down for. What Jake didn't see was the emptiness behind Elias's eyes, the place where fear used to live. You couldn't threaten a man who'd already lost everything that mattered. You couldn't intimidate someone who'd been walking with ghosts for 2 years. You know who I am? Jake demanded. I work for Thomas Garrett, biggest rancher in 3 counties. He don't take kindly to people interfering with his men. I don't much care who you work for, Elias said quietly. I care that you're hurting a child, so I'll say it once more, nice and clear. Let her go. One of Jake's companions stepped forward. Jake, maybe we should... Shut up, Davy. Jake's face had gone red, his grip on Lena's arm tightening until she made a small, pained sound. Nobody tells Jake Morrison what to do in my own town. This isn't your town, Elias said. And she isn't your toy. Last chance. Jake shoved Lena aside, hard enough that she stumbled and fell, and went for his gun. It was a fast draw, practiced, the move of a man who'd won confrontations before. But Elias was faster. His hand flashed down and up, the Colt coming out smooth and level, the hammer back before Jake's pistol had cleared leather. The metallic click of the cocked revolver echoed like thunder in the silent saloon. Don't, Elias said. Jake froze, his gun halfway out, his eyes locked on the barrel pointed at his chest. Behind him, his companions had their hands on their weapons, but nobody was moving. The mathematics of the situation were clear. Jake would die first, and probably at least one other person before Elias went down. Maybe more. You're making a mistake, Jake said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I've made plenty. One more won't matter much. Elias's finger rested on the trigger, steady as stone. Now you boys have a choice. You can walk out of here and we'll forget this ever happened. Or we can see how this plays out, and I promise you it won't end well for anyone. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Davy took a careful step backward, his hands coming up empty. Come on, Jake, it ain't worth it. Girl's nobody anyway. Jake's jaw worked, his pride warring with his survival instinct. Finally, slowly, he eased his gun back into its holster. This ain't over. Yeah, it is, Elias said. Now get out. They left, Jake shooting one last venomous look over his shoulder before pushing through the saloon doors. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room collapsed like a punctured lung. Men went back to their drinks, conversations resuming in low murmurs. The bartender wiped down the bar with hands that shook slightly. Elias lowered his gun and turned to where Lena had fallen. She was sitting on the floor again, her back against the wall, her face completely blank. No tears, no expression at all, just that terrible, learned stillness. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements careful and unthreatening. You all right? She didn't answer, didn't even look at him. My name's Elias, he tried. Elias Crow. What's your name? Nothing. Her eyes remained fixed on that invisible point in the distance. The deputy appeared at Elias's shoulder, his voice low. Told you she don't talk much. And mister, you just made yourself an enemy. Jake Morrison's got a mean streak, and Thomas Garrett backs his men no matter what they do. Then I reckon I won't be staying long, Elias said. He stood, intending to walk away, to finish his drink and ride out like he'd planned. But when he looked down at Lena, at this small, broken thing that a whole town had decided wasn't worth the trouble, he saw Emily's face, saw Martha's hands, saw 2 graves on a hill and a life he'd never get back. What he did next surprised even himself. You want to leave here? He asked Lena. Get away from this place? For the first time, her eyes moved. Slowly, like it hurt to do it, she lifted her gaze to his face. And in those eyes, Elias saw something he recognized. The look of someone who'd been drowning for so long they'd forgotten what air felt like. She nodded. Just once, barely perceptible, but it was there. Elias felt something shift in his chest, not the breaking that had happened when he'd buried his family, but something stranger. A crack maybe, in the ice that had sealed off his heart. A dangerous, terrifying crack that let in just enough warmth to hurt. All right then, he heard himself say. Go get whatever you got that matters to you. We're leaving. Lena stood, her movements slow and cautious, like she was afraid he might change his mind. She glanced around the saloon, then back at him, and shook her head slightly. Nothing. She had nothing worth keeping. Mister, the deputy said, you sure about this? Taking on a stray child? You don't know nothing about her, where she's from, what she's been through. Don't need to know, Elias interrupted. I know she deserves better than this. He looked at the men in the saloon, at their carefully averted eyes. All of you should be ashamed. 3 years you let a child live like an animal, and not one of you did a damn thing about it. Nobody met his gaze. Nobody argued. Elias held out his hand to Lena. Come on, let's get you someplace safe. She stared at his hand for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes, trust versus survival, hope versus fear. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her small, dirt-crusted hand in his. Her fingers were cold, so cold. They walked out of the saloon together, Elias moving slowly to match her uncertain steps. His horse waited at the hitching post, patient and unconcerned. Elias untied the reins and looked down at Lena. You ever ridden a horse? She shook her head. It's easy. I'll help you up, and you hold on to the saddle horn. I'll be right behind you. That sound all right? Another small nod. He lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird made of hollow bones, and settled her in the saddle. She gripped the horn with both hands, her knuckles white. Elias swung up behind her, making sure she had plenty of room, that she didn't feel trapped. We're going to walk nice and slow, he said. Head to the general store, get you some proper clothes and food, then we'll figure out where to go from there. Sound good? Lena didn't answer, but she leaned back slightly, just enough that her thin shoulders pressed against his chest. It was the smallest gesture of trust, and it made Elias's throat tighten. They rode slowly down the main street of Dustfall Crossing, past the leaning buildings and the people who looked away. At the general store, Elias dismounted and helped Lena down, then led her inside. The proprietor, a plump woman with suspicious eyes, watched them approach. Need some clothes for the girl, Elias said, putting money on the counter. Dress, shoes, stockings if you got them, and a coat, plus food supplies, bread, dried meat, whatever's fresh. The woman's eyes moved from the money to Lena to Elias's face. That the girl from the saloon? That's none of your concern? You selling or not? She pursed her lips but took the money. Got a dress that might fit, shoes too, but it'll cost more than what you put down. Elias added more coins. Whatever it takes. 20 minutes later, they left the store with Lena wearing a simple blue cotton dress that was still too big but clean, leather shoes that actually fit her feet, and a wool coat that would keep her warm when the nights turned cold. Elias carried a sack of supplies over his shoulder. Lena walked beside him, and though she still didn't speak, her steps were steadier now. They rode out of Dustfall Crossing as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Elias didn't look back. Behind them, the town settled into its evening routines, already forgetting the stranger who'd passed through and the child nobody had wanted to claim. But Elias would remember. He'd remember the way those men had looked away, the way they justified their cruelty with practicality. The way they'd let a child suffer because it was easier than caring. He'd remember because he'd almost done the same thing. Almost walked away. Almost told himself it wasn't his problem, and that scared him more than anything Jake Morrison could threaten. They made camp that night under a stand of cottonwoods beside a creek. Elias built a fire, made coffee, heated beans and cornbread from the supplies he'd bought. Lena sat on a blanket he'd spread for her, watching everything with those two old eyes. When he handed her a tin plate of food, she took it carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear. "Eat up," he said gently. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you." She ate slowly, carefully, her gaze never leaving him. Trust was going to take time, Elias realized. Probably a lot of time. This child had learned that the world was cruel, that adults were dangerous, that speaking up only brought pain. Unlearning those lessons wouldn't happen overnight. But he had time. For the first time in 2 years, he had all the time in the world. When she finished eating, he cleaned the dishes in the creek and added wood to the fire. The night had turned cold, stars spreading across the sky in thick clusters. Lena huddled in her new coat, her eyes starting to droop. "You should sleep," Elias said. "I'll keep watch. Nothing's going to hurt you, I promise." She curled up on the blanket, pulling the coat tight around her small body. Within minutes, she was asleep. But it was a restless sleep, full of twitches and small sounds that broke Elias's heart. He sat by the fire, coffee in hand, and wondered what the hell he'd done. He'd taken on responsibility he wasn't ready for, rescued a child he knew nothing about, and made enemies in a town he'd never have to see again. By any rational measure, he'd been foolish, reckless, stupid. But when he looked at Lena sleeping by the fire, her face finally soft in the firelight, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly, to the sleeping child and the watching stars and the ghosts that followed him everywhere. "I don't know how to do this, but I swear to you I'll figure it out. I'll keep you safe. I'll give you a chance at something better." The fire crackled. The creek murmured. Lena slept on. And Elias Crow, who'd been running from his past for 2 years, finally stopped. The first 3 days passed in a silence so complete it felt like traveling through a world made of glass. Elias kept their pace slow, mindful of Lena's inexperience with riding and the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones. They followed game trails through pine forests and skirted the edges of settlements, avoiding places where questions might be asked or faces might be remembered. Each night he made camp, built a fire, cooked simple meals, and spoke to her in a low, steady voice, even though she never responded. He told her about the land they were crossing, pointing out elk tracks and explaining how to read the weather in the clouds. He talked about his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Traveler, and how he'd won him in a card game in Denver 3 years back. He didn't talk about Emily or Martha or the homestead he'd burned. Those wounds were still too raw, and besides, Lena didn't need his grief added to her own. On the 4th morning, as he was saddling Traveler, Lena approached him carrying something small in her cupped hands. She held it out without a word. A smooth river stone, pale gray with a vein of white quartz running through its center. She'd found it by the creek where they'd camped. "That's real pretty," Elias said, examining it. "You want to keep it?" She nodded, then carefully tucked it into the pocket of her dress. It was the first thing she'd claimed as her own since leaving Dustfall Crossing, and Elias took it as a good sign. Small steps. Everything would be small steps. They rode into the town of Ridgeway on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun was high and hot. It was bigger than Dustfall Crossing, with actual brick buildings and a proper hotel, a bank, and a general store that looked well stocked. Elias had been thinking hard about their situation during the long rides. He had some money saved, enough to last a few months if he was careful, but eventually he'd need work. More importantly, Lena needed stability. She needed a roof over her head and regular meals and maybe, if he could manage it, a chance at some kind of normal life. He tied Traveler outside the hotel and helped Lena down. She stayed close to his side as they entered, her hand finding the back of his coat and gripping it tightly. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Help you?" "Need a room," Elias said. "2 beds if you got it, and a bath." The clerk's eyes moved to Lena, lingering on her threadbare appearance despite the new dress. "That your daughter?" "That's right," Elias said, the lie coming easily. "We've been traveling rough, She needs to clean up and rest. The clerk pursed his lips but pushed the register forward. $2 a night. Bath is extra. Elias signed a false name and paid for 3 nights. The room on the second floor was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Lena stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in, and Elias saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe wonder, maybe disbelief that this place was meant for her. "You stay here and rest," he told her. "I'm going to arrange that bath and get us some food. I'll lock the door, and I'll knock 3 times when I come back so you know it's me. Don't open it for anyone else, understand?" She nodded, already moving to sit on one of the beds, her small body sinking into the mattress like she couldn't quite believe how soft it was. Elias arranged for a bath to be brought up, along with soap and towels, then headed to the general store. He bought more supplies: food, a brush for Lena's hair, a simple rag doll he found on a shelf because every child should have something to hold on to. When he returned to the room with his arms full, Lena was sitting exactly where he'd left her, her hands folded in her lap. "Bath's coming," he said, setting down the packages. "And I got you something." He handed her the doll. It was nothing fancy, just cloth and stuffing with button eyes and yellow yarn for hair, but Lena took it like he'd given her something made of gold. She held it against her chest, her fingers curling into the fabric, and Elias saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "What do you want to name her?" he asked. Lena's lips moved, forming a word without sound. Elias leaned closer. "Say it again. I didn't catch that." Her voice came out barely above a whisper, rusty from disuse, but he heard it clearly enough. "Rose." It was the first word she'd spoken to him, and Elias felt something break open in his chest, something that hurt and healed at the same time. "Rose," he repeated, smiling. "That's a real nice name." 2 hotel workers arrived with a tin tub and buckets of hot water. Elias stepped into the hallway while they set everything up, giving Lena privacy. When they left, he knocked 3 times and waited until he heard the lock click before entering. "Water's hot," he said. "Take your time. I'll be right outside if you need anything." He sat in the hallway for the next hour, listening to the sounds of splashing water and trying not to think about how much Lena's small voice had sounded like Emily's. When the door finally opened, Lena stood there transformed. Her skin was pink from scrubbing, her hair, now several shades lighter, hung damp and tangle-free down her back. She looked like what she was, a child. Just a child who'd been forced to survive in a world that had no use for her. "Feel better?" he asked. She nodded, clutching Rose against her chest. They ate dinner in the hotel restaurant, and though Lena still didn't speak, Elias noticed she watched everything. The other diners, the waitress, the way people laughed and talked and existed without fear. She ate slowly, methodically, like someone who'd learned to make food last because you never knew when the next meal might come. That night, after Elias had blown out the lamp and settled into his own bed, he heard Lena crying, soft, muffled sounds that she was trying hard to suppress. He lay there in the darkness, debating whether to say something or let her have her privacy. Finally, he spoke into the dark. "It's all right to cry. Sometimes it's the only thing that helps." The crying stopped for a moment, then resumed, louder this time. Great gasping sobs that shook her small frame. Elias sat up, struck a match, and relit the lamp. Lena was curled on her side, Rose pressed to her face, her whole body trembling. He crossed to her bed and sat on the edge, careful not to crowd her. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." "They're gone," she whispered between sobs. "Mama and Papa. They're gone and they're not coming back." Elias felt his throat constrict. What happened to them? The story came out in broken pieces, punctuated by tears and long silences. Lena and her parents had been part of a wagon train heading west 3 years ago. Her mother had been pregnant, hopeful for a new start in Oregon, but somewhere in Wyoming, sickness had swept through the train. Cholera, maybe, or typhoid. Lena didn't know the name, only that people started dying fast. Her parents had fallen ill within days of each other. The wagon master, afraid of the disease spreading further, had made the decision to leave the sick behind with minimal supplies and a promise to send help from the next town. Lena, who hadn't shown symptoms, had been given to another family on the train. She remembered her mother crying, begging them to take care of her daughter. She remembered her father, too weak to stand, pressing a small Bible into her hands. The family who'd taken her had meant well at first, but their own children had fallen sick a week later. In the chaos and fear, somewhere between one camp and the next, Lena had been separated from the group. She'd wandered for days, following the wagon ruts, surviving on berries and creek water, until she'd stumbled into Dustfall Crossing more dead than alive. "I waited," she whispered. "I waited for them to come find me." But they never did. Elias reached out slowly and rested his hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Are you going to leave me too?" The question was small, terrified. "No," Elias said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise you that, Lena. Whatever happens, we're in this together now." She sat up slowly, her tear-streaked face catching the lamplight. "Why? Why did you help me? Nobody else did." It was a fair question. Elias thought about how to answer it, how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "I had a daughter once," he said finally. "Her name was Emily. She was about your age when she died. Fever took her, and then it took my wife too. For a long time after that, I didn't want to care about anything or anyone. I just wanted to disappear into myself and let the world go by." Lena listened, her eyes wide and attentive. "But when I saw you in that saloon, saw those men treating you like you were nothing, I remembered that there's things in this world worth fighting for, worth staying for." He paused, searching for the right words. "I can't bring Emily back. I can't undo what happened to you, but maybe I can make sure you get a chance at the life you should have had all along. Does that make sense?" She nodded slowly, then did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and wrapped her thin arms around his neck, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to sweep her away. Elias held her carefully, feeling the weight of this new responsibility settle onto his shoulders. It was terrifying and overwhelming and completely unexpected, but it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right for 2 years. "We're going to be all right," he said softly. "Both of us. We're going to figure this out together." When Lena finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer. She lay back down, tucking Rose beside her, and Elias returned to his own bed. This time, when he blew out the lamp, there was no crying, just the sound of 2 people breathing in the darkness, a little less alone than they'd been before. The next morning brought practical concerns that couldn't be ignored. Elias spent the morning making inquiries around town, asking about work and available land. Ridgeway was cattle country, and most of the big ranches already had their crews set for the season. But the owner of the general store, a man named Wendell Pierce, mentioned that he knew of a small spread about 10 miles north that might be looking for a hand. "Old man named Coulter owns it," Wendell said, measuring out flour while Lena watched from beside Elias. "Wife died last winter, and he's been struggling to keep up with the work. Might be willing to hire on someone reliable, especially if you know your way around horses and cattle." "I know enough," Elias said. "He got a place we could stay?" "There's a cabin on the property he used for hired help back when he had any. Ain't much, but it's got a roof and a stove." Wendell glanced at Lena. "Might be a good place to settle, at least for a while. Coulter's a decent man from what I hear." Elias bought what they needed and thanked Wendell for the information. As they walked back to the hotel, Lena tugged on his coat. "Are we going to live there?" she asked, her voice still quiet but getting stronger. "Maybe. Want to go take a look first, see if it feels right?" She considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay." They rode out the next morning, following Wendell's directions north along a dusty road that cut through rolling grassland. The Coulter place wasn't hard to find. A modest ranch house with a barn and several corrals, all showing signs of neglect and deferred maintenance. An older man with a white beard and stooped shoulders was mending a fence when they arrived. "Mr. Coulter?" Elias called out, dismounting. The old man straightened, his hand moving to shade his eyes. "That's me. You lost?" "No, sir. Name's Elias Crow. Wendell Pierce in town said you might be looking for help." Coulter's eyes moved to Lena, still sitting on Traveler, then back to Elias. "Might be. Depends on what kind of help you're offering and what you're wanting in return." "I know horses and cattle. Can fix most anything that breaks. Build what needs building. I work hard and I work honest. Elias kept his voice level, respectful. What I need is steady work and a place for me and my daughter to stay. Wendell mentioned you had a cabin. Daughter, huh? Coulter studied Lena with sharp eyes. She looks like she's been through something. We both have, Elias admitted. But we're looking to start over, do things right. Coulter was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he nodded toward the barn. Come on, I'll show you the place. The cabin sat about 100 yards from the main house, small but solidly built from logs that had aged to silver. Inside there was a main room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder, and a tiny kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. Dust covered everything, and the windows needed cleaning, but the structure was sound. Ain't been used in 2 years, Coulter said, since my last hand moved on. But it'll keep the weather out. Lena had climbed down from Traveler and now stood in the doorway, looking around with an expression Elias couldn't quite read. What do you think? He asked her. She walked slowly through the space, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She touched the fireplace stones, peered up at the loft, tested the pump at the kitchen sink. Finally, she turned back to them. It needs cleaning, she said seriously. But it could be nice. Coulter's eyes crinkled with something that might have been approval. Smart girl. She's right. It needs work. But if you're willing to put that work in, and if you can handle what I need done around here, we can work out an arrangement. He named a wage that was fair, plus use of the cabin and access to the garden plot. Trial period of 1 month. If it works out, we'll talk about something longer term. Elias extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, and just like that, Elias and Lena had something they hadn't had in a long time. A home. The next week blurred together in a frenzy of activity. Elias threw himself into the ranch work, mending fences, doctoring sick cattle, breaking a young horse that Coulter had been afraid to approach. The physical labor felt good, purposeful, and he fell into bed each night exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with running from grief. Lena took charge of the cabin with a determination that surprised him. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, aired out blankets, and organized the few possessions they'd accumulated. Coulter's wife had left behind jars of preserves and sacks of beans in the root cellar, and Lena inventoried everything with careful precision. She seemed to need the work, the structure, the ability to create order out of chaos. In the evenings, after the work was done, Elias would sit by the fireplace with a cup of coffee while Lena practiced her reading. She'd admitted, shyly, that her mother had been teaching her letters before the wagon train, but 3 years of survival had wiped away most of what she'd learned. Elias found an old primer in Coulter's house and worked through it with her, sounding out words and praising every small victory. Cat, Lena read carefully, her finger tracing the letters. The cat sat on the mat. That's exactly right, Elias said. You're doing real good. She beamed at the praise, and Elias felt that crack in his heart widen a little more. He was getting attached, he realized. Despite all his promises to himself, despite the walls he'd built, this small girl was working her way past his defenses one quiet moment at a time. It scared him, but it also felt like coming back to life after being dead for too long. On Saturday, 2 weeks after they'd arrived, Coulter invited them to the main house for supper. His daughter, Catherine, had come to visit from Ridgeway with her husband and 3 children. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running between rooms while Catherine cooked and her husband helped Coulter with evening chores. Lena stood frozen in the doorway when they arrived, overwhelmed by the chaos. Elias was about to suggest they leave when Catherine appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. You must be Lena, she said warmly. Papa told me about you. Would you like to help me with the biscuits? I could use an extra pair of hands. Lena looked up at Elias, seeking permission. He nodded encouragingly, and she followed Catherine into the kitchen. Through the doorway, Elias watched as Catherine patiently showed Lena how to cut the dough, her voice gentle and encouraging. The other children, ranging from about 5 to 10, gradually approached, curious about the newcomer. She's settling in all right? Coulter asked, handing Elias a glass of whiskey. Better than I expected, Elias admitted. She's got a strong spirit under all that fear. Catherine says the girl needs other children around, needs to remember how to play. Coulter took a sip of his own drink. You planning to stay on after the trial month? Elias watched Lena carefully placing biscuits on a baking sheet, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. If you'll have us, yes. This is the first place that's felt like we could actually build something. Good. You're a hard worker and you're honest. That counts for a lot. Coulter paused. What's your story, Crow? Man doesn't end up with someone else's child without a story. Elias had known this conversation would come eventually. He chose his words carefully. Lost my wife and daughter to fever couple years back. Been drifting since. Found Lena in a bad situation, helped her out of it. Didn't plan to take her on, but once I did, couldn't bring myself to let her go. She yours now, you reckon? I reckon she is, if she'll have me. Coulter nodded slowly. Then you might want to think about making it legal. Get papers drawn up, make it official. There's folks who might ask questions otherwise, and a child needs that protection. It was good advice, and Elias filed it away to think about later. For now, he let himself enjoy the evening. The warmth of the house, the sound of children laughing, the simple pleasure of breaking bread with decent people. Lena emerged from the kitchen with flour on her nose and something that almost looked like a smile on her face. At supper, she sat between Elias and Catherine's youngest daughter, picking at her food and listening to the conversation flow around her. When the children were excused to play outside, Lena hesitated, looking to Elias again. Go on, he said gently. Have fun. She went, following the other children into the twilight. Through the window, Elias watched them play a game that involved a lot of running and shrieking. Lena stood apart at first, observing, but gradually she began to move closer, to participate in small ways. It wasn't much, but it was something. You're good with her, Catherine observed, following his gaze. Patient. That's what she needs. I'm figuring it out as I go, Elias admitted. That's what all parents do, Catherine said with a smile. The ones who think they have it all figured out are usually the ones making the biggest mistakes. They rode back to the cabin that night under a sky full of stars. Lena was tired, leaning against Elias's back, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. Did you have fun? He asked. Mm-hmm, she murmured. Sarah, that's Catherine's middle girl, said I could come play next time they visit. That'd be nice. You should have friends your own age. They were quiet for a moment. Then Lena said, so softly, he almost missed it. Can I call you Papa? Elias's breath caught. He'd been expecting this question, had thought about how to answer it, but now that it was here, he found his carefully prepared words had vanished. Is that what you want? He asked. I don't want to forget my real Papa. But you're here, and he's not, and it feels right to call you that. Is that okay? Elias had to clear his throat before he could answer. Yeah, that's okay. More than okay. He paused. I won't replace your real father, Lena. Nobody could do that. But I'd be honored if you wanted to call me Papa. Her arms tightened around him, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. That night, after Lena had climbed the ladder to the sleeping loft and settled in with Rose, Elias sat by the fire and let himself think about what was happening. He'd taken on a child who wasn't his blood, made promises he couldn't be sure he could keep, tied himself to a place and a future he hadn't planned for. It went against everything he'd told himself after Martha and Emily died. But as he sat there listening to Lena's soft breathing from the loft above and feeling the warmth of the fire on his face, Elias realized something important. He'd been so focused on running from his grief that he'd forgotten how to live. Lena had given him a reason to stop running. She'd given him purpose and responsibility and something worth protecting. Maybe that's what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but letting it coexist with a future worth building. Maybe that's what second chances were for. The first frost came early that year, coating the grassland in silver and turning their breath to clouds in the morning air. Elias woke before dawn as he always did, built up the fire, and started coffee while Lena still slept in the loft above. The routine had become comfortable over the past 6 weeks, predictable in a way that soothed something restless in his chest. He was measuring out oats for breakfast when he heard the ladder creak and looked up to see Lena climbing down, her hair tangled from sleep, Rose tucked under one arm. Morning, she said, rubbing her eyes. Morning. Sleep all right? Had a dream about Mama. She padded over to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. A good one this time. She was singing. Elias poured hot water over the oats and stirred. That's good. The good dreams are important. Lena had been having nightmares regularly those first few weeks, waking up gasping and afraid. But lately, the bad dreams had started giving way to memories that didn't hurt quite so much. Elias took it as a sign that she was healing, slowly knitting herself back together. They ate breakfast as the sun began to lighten the sky. Then Elias headed out to start his work while Lena tackled her morning chores. Coulter had been teaching her how to tend the chickens and collect eggs, and she'd taken to the responsibility with fierce determination. By the time Elias returned from checking the cattle in the far pasture, she'd already gathered the eggs, fed the birds, and was sitting at the kitchen table with her primer, carefully forming letters on a piece of slate. "Look," she said, holding it up for his inspection. "I wrote my whole name." The letters were wobbly, but legible. Lena. Elias felt a surge of pride. "That's real fine work. Maybe tomorrow we'll work on your last name." She looked up at him, her expression suddenly uncertain. "What is my last name?" It was a question Elias had been avoiding thinking about too hard. He set down the bucket he'd been carrying and pulled out a chair sitting across from her. "Well, that depends. You want to keep your birth name, or would you want to take mine?" Lena's fingers traced the letters she'd written. "I don't remember my last name. I was too little when everything happened, and nobody in Dustfall Crossing ever asked." The casual cruelty of that statement hit Elias hard. 3 years and nobody had cared enough to even learn this child's full name. "Crow," he said quietly. "My last name is Crow. And if you want it, it's yours. We'd need to make it legal, get papers drawn up proper, but I think it's time we did that anyway." "Lena Crow." She tested the sound of it, rolling the words around in her mouth. Then she looked at him with those two old eyes that were slowly learning how to be young again. "Would that make you really my papa, not just pretend?" "I'm already really your papa, where it counts," Elias said, tapping his chest over his heart. "Papers just make it official for everyone else." She thought about this for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Okay. I want to be Lena Crow." The following Saturday, Elias rode into Ridgeway with Lena seated in front of him, both of them dressed in their best clothes. They visited the office of a lawyer named Morrison, no relation to Jake, thankfully, and explained the situation in terms that were carefully edited. Elias was a widower, Lena was an orphan he'd taken in. They wanted to formalize the adoption. Morrison drew up the papers with efficient strokes of his pen, asked a few questions about their circumstances, and seemed satisfied with Elias's answers. "You'll need a judge to sign off on this," Morrison said, blotting the ink. "Judge Hartley holds court here twice a month. Next session is in 2 weeks. You'll need to appear before him, answer some questions, and if everything's in order, he'll approve it." "What kind of questions?" Elias asked. "Basic things. Your ability to provide for the child, your character, your intentions. Judge Hartley's fair but thorough. He takes the welfare of children seriously." Morrison looked at Lena, who was sitting very still and proper in her chair. "Young lady, do you understand what adoption means?" "It means Elias will be my legal papa," Lena said carefully, "and I'll be his daughter, for always." "That's right. And is that what you want?" "Yes, sir," Morrison smiled. "Then I don't anticipate any problems. Judge Hartley will want to hear that from you directly, but you've got a good head on your shoulders." They left the office with the papers and a court date, and Elias felt lighter than he had in months. On impulse, he took Lena to the hotel restaurant for lunch, a rare extravagance. She ordered chicken and dumplings and ate every bite, her manners careful and deliberate. Afterward, they stopped at the general store where Elias bought her a new slate and chalk, and a book of fairy tales that Wendell recommended. "For when she gets better at reading," Wendell said. "My daughters loved this one." Walking back to where Traveler was tied, Lena slipped her hand into Elias's. It was such a natural gesture, so completely trusting, that Elias had to blink hard against the sudden sting in his eyes. 6 weeks ago, this child had been sitting alone in a saloon, unreachable and abandoned. Now she was holding his hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. They were halfway home when they encountered trouble. 3 riders appeared on the road ahead, blocking their path. Elias recognized Jake Morrison immediately, flanked by 2 of the men who'd been with him that day in Dustfall Crossing. Elias felt Lena tense against him, her small hands gripping the saddle horn so hard her knuckles went white. "Well now," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "If it isn't the hero and his little stray." Elias kept his hand loose and ready near his gun, his voice calm. "We're not looking for trouble, Morrison, just trying to get home." "Funny thing about trouble, sometimes it comes looking for you." Jake spurred his horse forward a few paces. "You cost me, Crow. Made me look like a fool in front of the whole town." Thomas Garrett wasn't too happy about that. "That was your doing, not mine. You had a choice to walk away." "So did you," Jake shot back. "Could have minded your own business, could have let things be. But you had to play the righteous man, had to make me back down." His eyes moved to Lena. "Over what? A worthless little nobody that the whole town was happy to forget about?" Elias felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and dangerous. "Careful what you say next." "Or what? You going to draw on 3 men with a child in your saddle?" Jake smiled, ugly and triumphant. "That's the difference between us, Crow. You got something to lose now. Makes you weak." Lena was shaking, her breath coming in quick gasps. Elias shifted slightly, putting more of his body between her and the men, his mind racing through options. 3 against 1, all of them armed, Lena caught in the middle. Even if he was fast enough to take Jake, the other 2 would have time to return fire. The mathematics of survival looked grim. "What do you want, Morrison?" "An apology would be a start. Get down off that horse and say you're sorry for interfering in business that wasn't yours." "That's not going to happen." Jake's smile widened. "Then maybe I'll take payment another way. Girl looks cleaner than she did. Bet she'd fetch a decent price in the right market. Orphans always do." The rage in Elias's chest exploded into something cold and focused. His hand moved to his gun, and he saw Jake's eyes widen slightly as he realized he'd pushed too far. But before anyone could draw, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's about enough of that." 4 more riders emerged from the tree line to the east, Coulter and his son-in-law, along with 2 ranch hands from a neighboring spread. All of them armed, all of them with rifles across their saddles. Coulter guided his horse forward until he was level with Elias. "Heard from Wendell that you boys might be heading home this way," Coulter said conversationally. "Thought we'd ride out to meet you, given that Morrison here's been making noise about unfinished business." Jake's face had gone pale. The odds had shifted dramatically, and everyone knew it. "This is between me and Crow," Jake said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "No, it's not," Coulter replied. "Crow works for me. That makes it my business. And that little girl is under my protection, same as him." He let that sink in, then continued. "Now you and your boys can ride back to the Garrett Ranch and tell Thomas that there's no quarrel here. Or we can settle things right now, and I promise you won't like how that turns out." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Davy, one of Jake's companions, pulled his horse's head around. "Come on, Jake, this ain't worth it." Jake's jaw worked, fury and humiliation warring across his face. Finally, he yanked his reins hard enough to make his horse toss its head. "This ain't over, Crow." "Yeah, it is," Coulter said flatly. "And if I see you or your boys anywhere near my property, or my people again, I'll make sure Thomas Garrett knows exactly what kind of men he's got working for him." They rode off, kicking up dust, Jake's shoulders rigid with rage. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and felt Lena's grip on the saddle horn slowly relax. "Thank you," Elias said to Coulter. "Don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Wendell's got a good eye for trouble, sent his boy to find me as soon as you left town." Coulter studied Elias with concern. "You all right, girl?" Lena nodded, but she was still pale and shaking. Elias wrapped an arm around her, holding her steady. "Let's get you both home," Coulter said. They rode back as a group, and the ranch hands didn't leave until they'd seen Elias and Lena safely inside the cabin. Coulter lingered at the door. "Morrison's got a mean streak and a long memory," he warned. "Thomas Garrett's a powerful man in this territory, and he don't like his people being challenged. You watch yourself, Crow." "I will, and Coulter, thank you for everything." The old man nodded and left. Elias locked the door and turned to find Lena standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "He was going to hurt us," she whispered. "But he didn't. We're safe." "What if Mr. Coulter hadn't come? What if—" "Hey." Elias knelt down in front of her, taking her shoulders gently. "Don't think about what ifs. We're here, we're safe, and we've got good people looking out for us. That's what matters." but Lena's eyes were filling with tears. It's my fault. If you hadn't helped me, if you didn't have me with you, he wouldn't have— Stop right there, Elias said firmly. None of this is your fault. Morrison's angry because I called him out for being cruel to a child. That's on him, not you. You hear me? She nodded, but the tears spilled over anyway. Elias pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. He held her until the storm passed, until her breathing evened out and the trembling stopped. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I know. I'm scared too sometimes. But being scared doesn't mean we're not brave. Brave is being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. He pulled back to look at her. And you're one of the bravest people I know. That earned him a watery smile. He got her settled with hot cocoa and the fairy tale book, and she curled up by the fire while he made dinner. But his mind kept circling back to Morrison's threat, to the look in the man's eyes. This wasn't over, despite what Coulter had said. Men like Jake Morrison didn't let grudges go easily. The next 2 weeks passed without incident, but Elias stayed vigilant. He made sure Lena was never alone outside the cabin, and he kept his rifle loaded and within reach. The court date approached, and the night before they were set to appear before Judge Hartley, Elias sat Lena down at the kitchen table. Tomorrow's important, he said. The judge is going to ask you questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that? What kind of questions? About how you came to be with me. About whether you want me to be your legal father. About whether you feel safe and cared for. He paused. You understand that once this is done, it's permanent? You'll be my daughter in every way that matters? Lena looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much but were learning, slowly, to hold hope again. Will you send me away if I'm bad sometimes? Never. Not ever. Even if you're bad. Even if you make mistakes. Even if we fight. You're mine, and I'm yours. That's what family means. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then I'm ready. They rode into Ridgeway early the next morning, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the grassland. The courthouse was a modest brick building on the main street, and Judge Hartley's chambers were on the second floor. Morrison the lawyer met them outside, carrying a leather folder with their papers. Judge is running a bit behind, he said, but he should see you within the hour. They waited on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, Lena swinging her legs nervously. Other people came and went. A woman arguing with a clerk about taxes. 2 men in suits discussing water rights. Finally, Morrison gestured them forward. Judge Hartley was a big man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His chambers were lined with law books, and a large desk dominated the space. He gestured for them to sit. Mr. Crow, Miss Lena, he said, his voice deep and measured. Mr. Morrison has explained the nature of your petition. Before I make any decision, I need to understand the circumstances that brought you together. Elias told the story carefully, sticking to facts, leaving out details that might raise uncomfortable questions. He'd found Lena abandoned in a town that didn't care for her welfare. He'd removed her from that situation and taken responsibility for her care. Over the past 2 months, they'd built a life together, and now they wanted to make it official. Judge Hartley listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Elias finished, the judge turned his attention to Lena. Young lady, I need to ask you some questions. Is that all right? Yes, sir. How old are you? 7, sir. I think maybe 8 now. I'm not sure exactly when my birthday is. And you've been living with Mr. Crow for about 2 months? Yes, sir. Tell me about your life before you met him. Lena's hands twisted in her lap, but her voice stayed steady. My mama and papa died when I was little. I got lost and ended up in a town called Dustfall Crossing. Nobody there wanted me. I had to find my own food and sleep wherever I could. People ignored me mostly, except when they wanted to be mean. Judge Hartley's expression hardened slightly. And Mr. Crow helped you? Men were hurting me in the saloon. Elias, Mr. Crow, he made them stop. Then he asked if I wanted to leave with him, and I said yes. Why did you say yes? Lena looked at Elias, then back at the judge. Because he was the first person in a long time who looked at me like I mattered, like I was a real person instead of something to ignore or kick aside. And how has he treated you since then? Good. Real good. Lena's voice grew stronger. He got me clothes and food. He found us a place to live. He teaches me reading and writing every night. He makes sure I'm safe and warm. He listens when I talk, even about sad things. And her voice wavered slightly. He doesn't get mad when I have nightmares, or when I'm scared, or when I cry about missing my real mama and papa. Judge Hartley was quiet for a moment, studying them both. Mr. Crow, you're a single man with no wife. Raising a young girl on your own will present unique challenges. How do you intend to address matters of propriety and the child's need for female guidance? Mrs. Catherine Porter, daughter of my employer, has offered to help in that regard, Elias replied. She and Lena have already formed a bond. Additionally, I intend to ensure Lena has access to education and proper socialization with other children. And your financial situation? I work for Samuel Coulter as a ranch hand. The pay is steady, and we have a cabin on his property. I have savings to fall back on if needed. We're not wealthy, but we're stable. Judge Hartley made some notes, then looked at Lena again. One last question, Miss Lena. If I approve this adoption, Mr. Crow will have full legal authority over you. He'll make decisions about your education, your health, your future. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. And is this what you truly want? For him to be your father? Lena didn't hesitate. Yes, sir, he already is my father. The paper just makes it so other people know it too. Something shifted in Judge Hartley's expression, a softening around the eyes. He signed the papers with a flourish and stamped them with his seal. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I hereby approve this adoption. Lena Crow, you are now the legal daughter of Elias Crow, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. He looked at Elias. Congratulations, and take good care of her. I will, Your Honor. I promise you that. They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant autumn sunshine, and Lena was clutching the official papers like they were made of gold. Morrison shook Elias's hand and congratulated them both before heading back to his office. For a moment, Elias and Lena just stood there on the courthouse steps, letting the significance of what had just happened sink in. We're really family now, Lena said wonderingly. We were always family, but yeah, now it's official. Elias looked down at his daughter, because that's what she was now, legally and in every way that mattered, and felt something settle into place in his chest. How about we celebrate? Ice cream at the hotel? Her face lit up. Really? Really. They were heading toward the hotel when a man stepped into their path. He was tall and distinguished looking, with expensive clothes and a silver watch chain across his vest. Something about his bearing screamed wealth and authority. Mr. Crow, the man said. I'm Thomas Garrett. I believe you've made the acquaintance of some of my ranch hands. Elias felt his muscles tense, his body automatically shifting to put himself between Garrett and Lena. I have. Jake Morrison tells an interesting story about your encounter in Dustfall Crossing, and another one about a confrontation on the road a few weeks back. I'm sure he does. Garrett studied Elias with cool, assessing eyes. Morrison's worked for me for 5 years. He's loyal, he's tough, and he's effective. But he's also got a temper and a tendency to push where he shouldn't push. He paused. I don't tolerate men who threaten children, even on my payroll. Jake's been reassigned to my northern ranch, 50 miles from here. You won't see him again. Elias hadn't been expecting that. Appreciate that, Mr. Garrett. Don't thank me yet. I'm a businessman, Mr. Crow, and I deal in practical matters. You humiliated one of my men, which reflects poorly on my operation. I'm addressing that by removing him from the situation, but I want your word that this matter is settled. No revenge, no spreading tales, no bad blood. You have my word, Elias said. I never wanted trouble to begin with, just wanted to protect my daughter. Garrett's eyes moved to Lena, and for a moment something almost like approval crossed his face. That's what a father should do. Take care of your own, mind your business, and we'll have no further quarrel. He tipped his hat. Good day to you both. He walked away, leaving Elias standing there trying to process what had just happened. Apparently, even powerful men had their limits when it came to tolerating cruelty toward children. Or maybe Garrett had simply decided that Jake Morrison was more trouble than he was worth. Either way, one threat had been neutralized. Is it really over? Lena asked quietly. Yeah, I think it is. Elias took her hand. Come on, you've got some ice cream waiting. They spent the rest of the afternoon in town, and Elias let Lena pick out fabric for a new dress at the general store. She chose a soft green cotton that reminded her of spring grass, she said, and Elias made arrangements for Catherine to help with the sewing. By the time they rode home, the sun was setting and Lena was practically glowing with happiness. That night, after she'd climbed up to the loft and settled in, Elias sat by the fire with the adoption papers spread on his lap. Official documents with official seals, transforming a decision made in a moment of desperate courage into something permanent and binding. He thought about Emily and Martha, about the family he'd lost and the family he'd found. There was grief in his heart still, probably always would be. But there was room for joy, too, for hope, for this second chance he'd been given. "Papa?" Lena's voice drifted down from the loft. "Yeah?" "Thank you for choosing me." Elias felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for choosing me back." He heard her settle into sleep, the soft sounds of breathing and rustling blankets. And Elias Crow, who'd spent 2 years running from everything that mattered, finally understood that he'd found exactly where he was supposed to be. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, burying the Montana grasslands under 3 feet of snow and turning the world into something crystalline and unforgiving. Elias woke one December morning to find ice crusted on the inside of the cabin windows, and Lena huddled under every blanket they owned, her breath visible in the frigid air. He built up the fire until the room was warm enough for her to emerge, then made hot oatmeal thick with honey and dried apples. "Is it always this cold?" Lena asked, wrapped in a quilt with just her face showing. "Some years worse than others. This is a hard one." Elias poured coffee for himself and hot milk for her. "But we're prepared. Got plenty of wood, plenty of food. We'll be fine." She nodded, trusting him completely, and that trust still had the power to humble him. 4 months they'd been together now, and Lena had transformed from that hollow-eyed ghost in the saloon into something more solid, more present. She laughed sometimes, quick, bright sounds that startled her as much as they delighted him. She asked questions constantly, hungry for knowledge about everything from why snow was white to how stars stayed in the sky. And she'd started calling him Papa without hesitation, the word coming as naturally as breathing. The deep snow made ranch work nearly impossible, so Coulter had reduced Elias's hours and told him to focus on keeping his own place secure. Elias spent his days splitting wood, checking on the animals in the small shed attached to the cabin, and making sure their supplies would last until spring. Lena helped where she could, her small hands getting stronger as she learned to card wool and knit simple stitches that Catherine had taught her. It was during one of those long winter evenings, with wind howling outside and the fire crackling cheerfully within, that Lena looked up from her knitting and said something that changed everything. "Papa, there was another girl in Dustfall Crossing, younger than me. I think about her sometimes." Elias set down the harness he'd been mending. "Tell me about her." Lena's needles clicked slowly as she worked through her thoughts. "She showed up maybe a year after I did. 6 years old, maybe younger. Her mama had died and her papa had left her with some people who didn't want her. She used to follow me around sometimes, but I couldn't help her. I couldn't even help myself." "What was her name?" "Birdie. At least that's what people called her because she was small and quiet like a bird." Lena's hands stilled. "I left her there when we rode away. I've been trying not to think about it, but now that I'm safe and warm and fed, I keep wondering if she's still sitting in that saloon corner, if she's cold, if she's hungry." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He'd been so focused on saving one child that he hadn't thought about how many others might be suffering in forgotten towns across the territory. "You think she's still there?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe something worse happened." Lena looked at him with eyes that were older than they should be. "I know we can't save everyone. I know that. But I can't stop thinking about her." They sat in silence for a while, the wind rattling the windows and the fire painting shadows on the walls. Finally, Elias spoke. "When spring comes and the snow melts, we'll go back. We'll see if we can find her." Lena's head snapped up. "Really? Really? No promises we can do anything. She might not be there anymore, or the situation might be complicated. But we can look. And if there's a way to help, we will." She set down her knitting and crossed to where he sat, wrapping her arms around his neck. Thank you, Papa. Thank you for having a heart big enough to remember someone else's pain, even when you were hurting yourself. Winter deepened, and January brought temperatures that made the December cold seem mild by comparison. The creek froze solid, and Elias had to break through ice each morning to get water for the animals. Lena's reading had progressed remarkably, and she spent hours absorbed in the fairy tale book, sometimes reading aloud to him while he worked on indoor repairs. Her favorite was a story about a girl who'd been lost in the woods and found her way home by following kindness instead of fear. "Do you think that's true?" she asked one evening. "That kindness can lead you home?" "I think kindness led you to me," Elias replied. "Or maybe it led me to you. Hard to say which. Maybe it was both." One particularly brutal night in late January, a blizzard hit with such force that Elias could barely see the shed from the cabin door. He'd gone out to check on the animals and nearly lost his way back, the wind and snow disorienting him until he literally stumbled into the cabin wall. Lena helped him inside, her small face tight with worry. "Don't go out again," she begged. "Please. The animals will be fine." "They will," he agreed, shaking snow from his coat. "And I'm not going anywhere. We're staying put until this passes." The blizzard lasted 3 days. They rationed their firewood carefully and ate simple meals, and Lena taught him a hand-clapping game she'd remembered from before the wagon train. They told stories and played checkers with buttons and beans, and Elias realized that despite the howling wind and the brutal cold, he was happier than he'd been in years. Not because life was easy, it wasn't, but because it meant something again. Because he had someone to protect, and someone who needed him, and someone who'd chosen him just as surely as he'd chosen her. When the storm finally broke, they emerged into a world transformed. Snow had drifted higher than the cabin windows on the north side, and the sun on all that white was blinding. Elias dug paths to the shed and the woodpile, while Lena watched from the doorway, and when he came back in, she had hot coffee waiting. "We made it," she said, like she'd been worried they wouldn't. "Course we did. We're a team, you and me." February brought a thaw, and with it came Catherine and her children for a visit that lifted everyone's spirits. The women, because Lena was starting to be included in that category much to her delight, worked on sewing projects while the children played in the snow. Catherine pulled Elias aside at one point, her expression serious. "How's she really doing?" Catherine asked quietly. "Better than I could have hoped. Still has nightmares sometimes, still gets scared when strangers approach, but she's healing." "And you?" Elias looked at her in surprise. "What about me?" "Papa says you came here running from something. Says you had the look of a man who'd lost everything and didn't care if he lived or died." Catherine's eyes were kind but searching. "That's not the man I see now?" "No," Elias admitted. "It's not. Lena saved me just as much as I saved her. Maybe more." "Good. Because that girl worships the ground you walk on, and she needs you to stay whole." It was good advice, and Elias took it to heart. He'd been so focused on helping Lena heal that he hadn't paid attention to his own wounds. But he was healing too, he realized. The constant ache of grief that had lived in his chest was still there, but it had changed shape, become something he could live with instead of something that threatened to drown him. March arrived with mud and rain and the first tentative signs of spring. Elias helped Coulter with calving season, working long hours in the barn while Lena stayed with Catherine or did her lessons at the cabin. One evening, he came home exhausted and covered in mud to find Lena had made dinner. Burnt biscuits and undercooked beans, but she'd done it herself, and her pride in the accomplishment was worth more than perfect food. "This is really good," Elias lied, chewing manfully through a biscuit that had the texture of a rock. "Papa, I know it's terrible. You don't have to pretend." He laughed, the sound startling both of them. "Okay, it's pretty bad, but you tried, and that counts for a lot. Next time will be better." "Will you teach me? How to cook properly?" "I will. Though I should warn you, I'm no great cook myself. We might need to ask Catherine for help." They worked through the spring together, and Elias watched Lena bloom like the wildflowers that carpeted the grassland in April. She grew taller, filled out, lost that skeletal fragility that had marked her when they first met. Her hair, now brushed and braided each morning, shone dark brown with hints of red in the sunlight. Her smile came easier, her laughter more frequent. She was becoming the child she should have been all along, But Elias hadn't forgotten her request about Bertie. As soon as the mountain passes cleared and travel became feasible again, he started making preparations. Coulter noticed and asked questions. "You're planning a trip," the old man observed one morning. "Just for a few days? There's something Lena and I need to do." "This have anything to do with where you found her?" "It does." Coulter nodded slowly. "Be careful. Some places don't take kindly to folks stirring up old business." "I know, but it's important." They left on a bright May morning when the world was green and alive with possibility. Lena rode in front of Elias on Traveler, a small pack of supplies secured behind the saddle. She was quiet as they traveled, her thoughts clearly far away, and Elias let her have that space. Some things needed to be processed in silence. They reached Dustfall Crossing late on the second day. The town looked exactly as Elias remembered, sad and neglected, buildings leaning like they might collapse any moment. He felt Lena tense as they rode down the main street, her hands gripping the saddle horn. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I didn't think coming back would be this hard." "We don't have to stay. We can just ask around about Bertie and leave." "No, I need to do this." They tied Traveler outside the general store this time, avoiding the saloon. Inside, a woman Elias didn't recognize stood behind the counter, measuring out flour for a customer. When she finished, she turned to them with a professional smile that faltered when she saw Lena. "Lena? Is that you?" Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, look at you, clean and healthy and growing. Heard you left town with some stranger last fall." The woman's eyes moved to Elias, assessing. "That him?" "This is my papa," Lena said, and Elias heard the pride in her voice. "Elias Crow." "Margaret Finch. I run the store now that my husband passed." She studied them both carefully. "You here to cause trouble?" "No, ma'am," Elias replied. "We're looking for information about another child, girl named Bertie, 6 or 7 years old, small, quiet. Was here last time we passed through?" Margaret's expression shifted to something complicated, pity mixed with resignation. "Bertie, poor thing, she's not here anymore." Lena's face went pale. "What happened to her?" "Family came through about 2 months back. Preacher and his wife, traveling circuit. They were looking to take in orphans, give them proper homes and Christian upbringing. Bertie went with them." "Where did they take her?" Elias asked. "North, toward Helena, that's all I know." Margaret leaned forward on her elbows. "Look, I know how this town treated you kids. Know we should have done better. But Bertie's with good people now. They'll give her what she needs. Or they'll work her like a servant and call it charity," Lena said, her voice sharp with anger Elias had never heard before. "That's what happened to Mary Beth, remember? The couple who took her said they'd give her a home, but really they just wanted free labor." Margaret's face flushed. "That's different. Is it?" Lena's hands were shaking. "You people let children suffer because it was easier than helping. You told yourselves it wasn't your problem, that someone else would do something. Well, nobody did. Nobody except Papa." The other customers in the store had gone quiet, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't seem to find the words. Elias put a hand on Lena's shoulder. "Come on, we're not going to solve anything here." They left the store and stood on the wooden sidewalk, Lena breathing hard and fighting tears. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said all that." "No, you should have. They needed to hear it." Elias looked up at the sky, thinking. "Margaret said Helena. That's a big place. Might be hard to find one preacher and his wife. But we have to try, right?" "We do, but not today. We're both tired and upset. Let's camp somewhere away from this place, get a fresh start in the morning." They rode out of Dustfall Crossing as the sun began to set, and Elias felt Lena relax once the town was behind them. They made camp in a grove of aspens with a clear stream nearby, and while Elias cooked dinner, Lena sat with Rose and talked to the doll in a low voice. Working through her feelings, he guessed, learning how to process anger and fear and all the complicated emotions that came with confronting the past. After they'd eaten, she came and sat beside him at the fire. "Thank you for bringing me back here. I know it was hard. Harder for you than for me. Maybe, but you did it anyway." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think we'll find Bertie?" "I think we'll try our best. That's all we can do." They spent the next day traveling north, following the well-worn road toward Helena. The capital city was nearly a week's ride away, but Elias figured they'd ask questions along the way, see if anyone had seen a preacher traveling with a small girl. Small towns and way stations, people who made their living serving travelers. Someone would remember. At a trading post 2 days north of Dustfall Crossing, they got their first lead. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Hank, nodded when Elias described the preacher. "Sure, I remember them. Sanctimonious fellow with a wife who looked like she'd been baptized in vinegar. Had a little girl with them, scared-looking thing. They stayed here one night, maybe 6 weeks back." "Did they say where they were headed?" Lena asked. Preacher said something about a mission community near Helena. Place called Grace Haven, if memory serves. They take in orphans and foundlings, teach them scripture and work. Hank scratched his beard. "Can't say if it's a good place or not. Some folks say the mission does right by the children. Others say it's more about free labor than Christian charity." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "You know how to find this place?" "About 15 miles east of Helena proper. Can't miss it. Big compound with a white church at the center." They thanked Hank and continued their journey, pushing a little harder now that they had a destination. Lena rode in tense silence, and Elias could practically feel the worry radiating off her. When they stopped for the night, she barely ate. "What if we're too late?" she finally said. "What if they're hurting her?" "Then we'll put a stop to it," Elias replied firmly. "Whatever's happening, we'll handle it." They reached Helena on a warm afternoon when the city was bustling with commerce and activity. Elias had been here once before, years ago, and he was struck by how much it had grown. New buildings, new people, the raw energy of a place that believed in its own future. They asked directions at a livery stable and were pointed east toward the mission. Grace Haven sat in a valley surrounded by fields, and from a distance it looked almost idyllic. The white church gleamed in the sunlight, surrounded by several large buildings that must have served as dormitories and workspaces. Children moved through the compound, some working in the gardens, others carrying water or hanging laundry. It looked organized, purposeful, almost peaceful. But as they rode closer, Elias noticed things that troubled him. The children moved with rigid efficiency, no playing or laughter. They all wore identical gray clothing, boys and girls alike. And there were adults watching them constantly, stern-faced men and women who carried themselves with the authority of jailers more than caretakers. "Papa," Lena whispered, "I don't like this." "Neither do I. But we're here to gather information, not jump to conclusions. Let's see what we can find out." They were met at the compound entrance by a tall woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her dress was black and high-necked, and her face had the pinched look of someone who found joy suspicious and laughter sinful. "May I help you?" Her voice could have chilled milk. "We're looking for a little girl named Birdie," Elias said, "brought here by a traveling preacher about 6 weeks ago. All our children are under the care and guidance of Reverend Blackwell. If you wish to speak with him, you'll need to make an appointment. We just want to know if she's here, if she's safe." The woman's expression hardened. "All children at Grace Haven are safe. They are being taught the ways of righteousness and the value of hard work. Now, if you don't have official business—" "I do," Lena interrupted, sliding down from Traveler. "My name is Lena Crow, and Birdie is my friend. I need to see her." "Children do not make demands here, young lady. They show respect and obedience." "I'm not one of your children," Lena shot back, "and I'm not leaving until I know Birdie is all right." The woman looked like she wanted to argue further, but a man emerged from the main building before she could respond. He was middle-aged with a round face and soft hands, dressed in black with a white collar that marked him as clergy. "Sister Agnes, what seems to be the trouble?" "These people are asking about one of the children, Reverend Blackwell." The Reverend's eyes swept over Elias and Lena with calculated assessment. "Which child?" "Her name is Birdie," Elias said. "Came from a town called Dustfall Crossing." "Ah, yes, Rebecca. We gave her a proper Christian name. She's adjusting well to life here." The Reverend smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Did you have some claim on the child?" "I'm her friend," Lena said firmly, "and I want to see her." "That won't be possible. Rebecca is in the middle of her lessons and cannot be disturbed. Besides, we discourage contact with outsiders. It interferes with the children's spiritual development." Elias felt anger building in his gut, but he kept his voice level. We just want to make sure she's being treated well. Mr. Crow. Mr. Crow, I assure you that all children here receive food, shelter, education, and moral guidance. We prepare them for productive lives in service to both fellow man and the Almighty. Now, I must ask you to leave. This is private property. Not until we see Bertie, Lena insisted. Sister Agnes stepped forward, her hand moving toward Lena's arm, but Elias was faster. He placed himself between them, his expression making it clear that touching his daughter would be a mistake. We're not here to cause trouble, Elias said quietly, but we're not leaving either until we know that child is safe. For a moment, the Reverend's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then he forced the smile back into place. Very well. You may see Rebecca briefly to satisfy your concerns. But I warn you, she is no longer the wild, undisciplined creature she was when she arrived. She is learning proper behavior. They were led through the compound, past children who watched them with hollow eyes. Elias noted the way they flinched when adults walked by, the mechanical efficiency of their movements. This wasn't a home or even a school. It was something else entirely, something that dressed itself in righteousness while crushing the spirit out of children who'd already been broken by the world. Bertie was in a large room with 20 other girls, all sitting at long tables copying scripture onto slates. She looked even smaller than Lena had described, a tiny thing with dark hair cropped short and bruises on her thin arms that no amount of long sleeves could completely hide. When she looked up and saw Lena, her eyes went wide. "Lena?" she whispered. "Hello, Bertie." The girl started to stand, but Sister Agnes's sharp voice stopped her. "Rebecca, you have not been dismissed. Can I talk to her, please?" Bertie's voice was barely audible. Reverend Blackwell nodded permission, and Bertie approached slowly, her movements careful and guarded. When she reached Lena, she didn't hug her or smile or show any of the joy that should have come from seeing a familiar face. She just stood there, trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" Lena asked gently. Bertie glanced at the Reverend, then back at Lena. "I'm fine. They feed us and teach us. It's better than before." But her eyes told a different story. They begged for help while her mouth spoke lies. Elias knelt down to Bertie's level. "Bertie, my name is Elias. I'm Lena's father. If you want to leave here, if you want to come with us, we can make that happen." "Mr. Crow," the Reverend said sharply, "you are attempting to interfere with the lawful guardianship of a child. Rebecca was willingly surrendered to our care by her previous guardian. She is here legally and appropriately." "Is she here willingly?" Elias asked, his eyes still on Bertie. The small girl's throat worked as she swallowed. I want to stay. I'm learning to be good." It was the most heartbreaking thing Elias had ever heard, the sound of a child so beaten down that she'd convinced herself that misery was what she deserved. "Bertie," Lena said, tears streaming down her face, "you don't have to be good. You're already good. You just have to be you." "That's enough," Reverend Blackwell declared. "You've seen the child. Now leave." They were escorted back to the entrance, Sister Agnes watching them with cold satisfaction. As they mounted Traveler, Elias looked back at the compound and felt a fury he hadn't experienced since the day he'd confronted Jake Morrison. "We're going to get her out of there," he told Lena. "How? They said it was legal." "I don't care what they said. That place is a prison dressed up as a mission, and I'll be damned if I leave a child there to suffer." He turned Traveler toward Helena proper. "We're going to need help. Legal help." They found a lawyer's office near the courthouse, a small practice run by a young man named Daniel Walsh, who listened to their story with increasing concern. "Grace Haven has been the subject of complaints before," Walsh admitted, "but Reverend Blackwell is well connected and he always has his paperwork in order. If he has legal guardianship—" "Can we challenge it?" Elias interrupted. "Possibly, if we can prove the child is being abused or that the guardianship was obtained through fraud." Walsh tapped his pen against his desk. "But it would take time. Investigations, court proceedings, testimony. Months, maybe longer." "We don't have months," Lena said. "She's being hurt now." Walsh looked at the young girl with sympathy. "I understand. But the law moves slowly, and men like Reverend Blackwell know how to use that to their advantage. Elias stood, his jaw set. Then we'll find another way. They left the lawyer's office, and Elias spent the rest of the day making careful inquiries around Helena. He talked to merchants, to ranch hands, to anyone who might have information about Grace Haven. What he learned painted a picture that was even worse than he'd feared. Children disappeared from the mission regularly, some running away, others simply vanishing. There were whispers of harsh punishments, of children worked until they collapsed, of Reverend Blackwell's special lessons for the older girls. That night, lying under the stars in a camp outside the city, Elias made his decision. Tomorrow night, he told Lena, we're going back for Birdie. We're going to get her out of there, legal or not. They'll come after us. They'll say we kidnapped her. Let them try. We'll be long gone before they know what happened. Lena looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. You'd do that? Risk everything? I'd do anything to protect children who can't protect themselves. That's what being a father means. And you, he touched her cheek gently, you're teaching me how to be brave enough to do what's right instead of what's safe. She threw her arms around him, and Elias held his daughter close while he planned a rescue that could cost him everything he'd built. But some things were worth the risk. Some things demanded courage even when the outcome was uncertain, and saving Birdie from Grace Haven was one of those things. They spent the following day preparing with the careful precision of soldiers before battle. Elias purchased supplies in Helena, rope, a dark blanket, matches, and a small amount of laudanum from the apothecary that he hoped he wouldn't need to use. He studied the mission compound from a distance, noting the routines, the guard rotations, the patterns of movement. Grace Haven operated like clockwork, rigid and predictable, which meant there would be gaps in that precision if you knew where to look. Lena watched him work with a seriousness that made her seem older than her 8 years. She didn't ask unnecessary questions or express doubts. She simply helped where she could and stayed quiet when he needed to think. That evening, as they waited for full darkness, she sat beside him and spoke in a voice that was steady despite the danger they were facing. If something goes wrong, if they catch us, you should leave me and save Birdie. She needs you more than I do. Elias turned to look at his daughter, seeing the determination in her eyes and the set of her jaw. That's not going to happen. We're all getting out of there together, or none of us are. But Papa, no arguments. We're a family now, Lena. That means we protect each other, no matter what. He put his arm around her shoulders. Besides, you're the one who'll need to lead Birdie out while I handle any trouble. Can't do that if you're not there. She leaned against him, and they sat in silence while the sun set and the stars emerged one by one. When full darkness had settled over the valley, Elias checked his revolver, made sure his knife was secure, and looked at Lena one last time. You remember the plan? I remember. You create a distraction at the main building. I go to the girls' dormitory, find Birdie, and get her out through the back window you loosened this morning. We meet at the tree line to the east. And if something goes wrong, I take Birdie and ride for Helena, find Mr. Walsh, the lawyer, and tell him everything. Good girl. He kissed the top of her head. Let's go get your friend. They approached Grace Haven on foot, leaving Traveler tied in a grove of cottonwoods a quarter-mile away. The compound was dark except for a few lanterns burning in the main building where Reverend Blackwell had his quarters. Elias could see 2 men walking patrol, but their routes were lazy and inattentive. They weren't expecting trouble. That would change soon enough. Elias waited until the nearest guard had passed, then moved silently toward the main building. He'd spent years tracking game through forests and learning to move without sound, and those skills served him now. When he reached the Reverend's window, he could see the man inside, sitting at a desk and writing by lamplight, probably composing tomorrow's sermon about righteousness and obedience. Elias struck a match and touched it to the oil-soaked rag he'd wrapped around a piece of kindling. The flame caught immediately, and he tossed it through the open window into a pile of papers on a side table. Then he moved back into the shadows and waited. It took less than a minute for the fire to spread and for Reverend Blackwell to notice. The man's shout of alarm pierced the night, and suddenly the compound erupted into chaos. Guards came running, someone rang a bell, and people spilled out of buildings carrying buckets of water. Perfect. While everyone's attention was focused on the main building, Lena slipped through the darkness toward the girls' dormitory. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest, but she forced herself to move carefully, to stay low and quiet. The window Elias had loosened that morning was on the north side of the building, away from the fire and the commotion. She reached it without being seen and pushed gently. The window swung inward with barely a sound, and Lena pulled herself up and through, dropping softly onto the dormitory floor. The room was dark, filled with the sounds of sleeping children, but a few girls near the window had woken from the noise outside. "Who's there?" a frightened voice whispered. "It's me, Lena. I'm looking for Bertie, Rebecca. Where is she?" "Third bed from the end." The voice was suspicious but not hostile. "What's happening?" "There's a fire. Everyone's trying to put it out." Lena moved carefully between the beds until she found the small form she was looking for. "Bertie, wake up. We're leaving." Bertie's eyes flew open, wide with confusion and fear. "Lena, what?" "No time to explain. We have to go now." Lena pulled the blanket back. "Can you walk?" "I think so. They made me clean the floors all day on my knees. They hurt." Rage flared in Lena's chest, but she pushed it down. Anger could wait. Right now, they needed to move. She helped Bertie to her feet and guided her toward the window. Other girls were sitting up now, watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hope to fear. One older girl, maybe 12, spoke up. "You're taking her away from here?" "Yes." "Take me too, please." "And me," another voice said. Suddenly, half the room was whispering, pleading, begging to be rescued. Lena felt her heart break because she knew they couldn't save everyone. Not tonight, maybe not ever, but she could save one. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I'm so sorry, but we can only take Bertie right now. I promise we'll try to help the rest of you. I promise." She boosted Bertie up to the window and climbed out after her. They dropped to the ground just as someone shouted that the fire was under control. Lena grabbed Bertie's hand and ran, half dragging the smaller girl toward the tree line where Papa was supposed to meet them. But when they reached the shadows, Elias wasn't there. Lena's breath came in panicked gasps as she scanned the darkness. Where was he? He should have been here by now. Had something gone wrong? Had they caught him? "Lena, I'm scared," Bertie whimpered. "It's okay. Papa will be here. He promised." But minutes passed and there was no sign of him. Lena was just starting to think she'd have to make the terrible choice of leaving without him when she heard footsteps behind them. She spun around, ready to run, and nearly sobbed with relief when she saw Elias emerge from the darkness. "Papa." "Sorry, had to make sure they were too busy to notice you." He knelt down in front of Bertie, his voice gentle. "Hello, Bertie. I'm Elias. We're going to take you somewhere safe." Bertie looked at him with eyes that had forgotten how to trust. "They'll come after us. Reverend Blackwell says runaways always get caught." "Not this time," Elias said firmly. He stood and scooped Bertie into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and started moving quickly through the trees. "Come on!" They reached Traveler, and Elias lifted both girls onto the saddle before swinging up behind them. He urged the horse into a trot, then a canter, putting distance between them and Gracehaven as quickly as possible. They rode hard for an hour before Elias finally slowed, his ears straining for sounds of pursuit. But the night was quiet except for the normal sounds of the wilderness. "I think we're clear," he said, "at least for now." They made camp in a narrow canyon where a fire wouldn't be visible from the main trail. Elias wrapped Bertie in a blanket and gave her water and some dried meat, but she was shaking too hard to eat. Lena sat beside her, holding her hand and speaking softly. "You're safe now, I promise. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." "But they'll find us. They always find the ones who run away, and then the punishment is worse." "They're not going to find us," Elias said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "We're going to be far from here before they even figure out which direction we went. And even if they did find us, they'd have to go through me first." Bertie looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief, like she wanted to trust his words but didn't dare. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Because you deserve better than what you've had. Because every child deserves to be safe and cared for. And because my daughter asked me to." Elias gestured to Lena. She remembered you, worried about you, and wouldn't rest until we came looking. That's the kind of person she is. Bertie turned to Lena with wonder in her eyes. You came back for me. Of course I did. You were kind to me when nobody else was. You shared your food even though you barely had any. I couldn't leave you there. Slowly, like a flower opening to the sun, Bertie's face began to soften. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she threw her arms around Lena, sobbing with relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming weight of finally being free. Lena held her and cried too, and Elias had to look away because his own eyes were burning. They let Bertie sleep late the next morning, giving her the rest her small body desperately needed. When she finally woke, Elias made a hot breakfast and they sat together in the morning sun while Bertie ate like she hadn't seen food in weeks. What happens now? She asked between bites. We go home, Elias said. Back to Montana. There's a cabin there, and land, and good people who will help us. And I can stay with you? If that's what you want. Bertie looked at Lena. Will you be there? Of course, we're family now. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Family. It was what all three of them had lost, and what they'd somehow, against all odds, found again in each other. They traveled for 5 days, taking back roads and avoiding towns where questions might be asked. Elias knew that Reverend Blackwell would likely report Bertie as kidnapped, and there might be legal consequences down the road. But he'd deal with that when it came. Right now, his priority was getting both girls home safely. Bertie slowly emerged from her shell during the journey. She was still jumpy and frightened easily, but Lena's patient companionship and Elias's steady presence began to work their magic. By the 3rd day, Bertie was actually smiling occasionally. By the 5th, she laughed at something silly Lena said, and the sound was like bells ringing. When they finally rode onto Coulter's property, the old man came out to meet them. His eyes moved from Elias to Lena to the small dark-haired girl sitting in front of them, and understanding dawned on his weathered face. You found another one, he said. We did. Her name's Bertie. She needs a home. Coulter was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Cabin's going to be a bit crowded with 3 of you. We'll manage. I expect you will. Coulter smiled slightly. Catherine's going to have a field day fussing over another lost child. Best get ready for that. He was right. Catherine descended on them the next day with clothes she'd already started sewing, food she'd prepared, and a maternal fierceness that was both overwhelming and exactly what Bertie needed. Within a week, Bertie had her own bed in the loft next to Lena's, a new dress, and shoes that actually fit. She followed Lena everywhere, and slowly, so slowly, she began to speak more freely and move without that terrible flinching wariness. But Elias knew the law would catch up eventually, and he wasn't surprised when 2 weeks after their return, a marshal showed up at the cabin asking questions. Daniel Walsh, the lawyer from Helena, had sent word ahead, and Elias was prepared. Marshal Graves, the man introduced himself. I'm investigating a report of child abduction from Grace Haven Mission. Man named Reverend Blackwell claims you forcibly removed a child under his legal guardianship. I removed a child who was being abused, Elias replied calmly. There's a difference. That's not for you to decide. If you had concerns, you should have gone through proper channels. I tried that. Lawyer told me it would take months. Child didn't have months. Marshal Graves sighed. He looked tired, like this was just another complicated situation in a long line of them. I'm going to need to speak with the girl, and I'll need to see any evidence of abuse you claim existed. You can speak with her, but I'm staying in the room, and if she gets upset, this conversation ends. They found Bertie in the garden with Lena, picking early vegetables. When she saw the marshal's badge, she went pale and backed against Lena protectively. Elias approached slowly. Bertie, this is Marshal Graves. He needs to ask you some questions about Grace Haven. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. Understand? She nodded, her eyes huge with fear. The marshal knelt down, making himself less imposing. His voice was gentle when he spoke. Bertie, can you tell me what it was like at the mission? She was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to talk. She told him about the endless work, the meager food, the punishments for tiny infractions. She told him about being locked in a dark closet for speaking without permission, about Sister Agnes hitting her hands with a switch until they bled, about Reverend Blackwell's special lessons, where he touched the older girls in ways that made them cry. By the time she finished, Marshal Graves's jaw was set and his eyes were hard. He stood and looked at Elias with new respect. I'll need to investigate these claims thoroughly. But if they're true, and I have no reason to doubt this child, Reverend Blackwell is going to face serious charges. He paused. What you did was still illegal, Mr. Crow, but given the circumstances, I'm inclined to look the other way. Officially, I'll report that the child ran away and you provided shelter as any decent person would. And Grace Haven? I'll be paying them a visit. Along with some colleagues, places like that need to be shut down, and the people running them need to answer for what they've done. After the marshal left, Elias found himself sitting on the cabin steps, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything that had happened. Lena came and sat beside him. Is it really over? She asked. I think so. Or at least this part is. What about the other children, the ones we left behind? Marshall's going to investigate. If he finds what I think he'll find, those children will be removed and placed somewhere better. We can't save everyone ourselves, Lena, but we did what we could. She nodded, accepting this difficult truth. Bertie's sleeping better now. Last night she didn't have any nightmares. That's good. Healing takes time, but she's got time now. She's got safety and people who care about her. Are we going to keep her? Make it official like you did with me? Elias looked at his daughter, his fierce, compassionate, brave daughter, who'd grown so much in less than a year. If she wants that, yes. If she wants to be part of this family, we'll make it legal. We'll give her what you have, a home, a name, a future. She wants it, Lena said with certainty. She told me yesterday that she wishes she could call you Papa like I do. Something warm bloomed in Elias's chest. Then I guess we'll be making another trip to see Judge Hartley. They did exactly that 6 weeks later, after Marshal Graves had completed his investigation and Grace Haven had been shut down. Reverend Blackwell and Sister Agnes were arrested on multiple charges, and the children were removed to legitimate care facilities and foster families. Daniel Walsh helped Elias navigate the legal complexities of adopting a second child, and Judge Hartley, remembering them from their first visit, expedited the process. On a warm August afternoon, Bertie became Bertie Crow, officially and legally part of the family. She stood between Elias and Lena in the judge's chambers, holding both their hands, and when the judge asked if this was what she wanted, her voice was clear and steady. Yes, Your Honor. I want to be a Crow. I want to be Lena's sister and Elias's daughter. I want to belong somewhere. Then so be it, Judge Hartley said, signing the papers with a flourish. He looked at Elias with something like awe. Mr. Crow, you're building quite a family here. Family builds itself, Elias replied. I'm just trying to give it a place to grow. They celebrated that night at the cabin with Coulter and Catherine and her whole family. There was food and laughter and music, and for the first time since Martha and Emily had died, Elias felt truly, completely happy. Not because the pain of losing them had disappeared, it never would, but because he'd learned that grief and joy could coexist, that you could honor the past while embracing the future. He watched Lena and Bertie playing with Catherine's children, saw them running and laughing with the unselfconscious freedom of children who finally felt safe, and he understood something profound. He hadn't just saved these girls, they'd saved him. They'd given him a reason to stop running, to build something lasting, to open his heart again, even though it meant risking the kind of pain he'd sworn never to endure again. The years that followed were filled with the beautiful ordinariness of family life. Elias continued working for Coulter, eventually saving enough to purchase a small piece of land of his own. He built a larger cabin with proper bedrooms for the girls, a sturdy barn, and corrals for the horses he was learning to breed and train. Lena and Bertie grew up together, more like twins than adopted sisters, inseparable and fiercely loyal to each other. Lena's passion for reading blossomed into a love of learning that impressed everyone who knew her. By the time she was 12, she was reading advanced literature and mathematics, teaching herself from books that Elias ordered from back east. Bertie, younger but no less determined, followed in her sister's footsteps, though her gifts lay more in art and music. She could draw anything she saw and had a voice that made people stop and listen when she sang. Catherine became a surrogate mother to both girls, teaching them the practical skills they'd need as they grew older: sewing, cooking, managing a household. But she also encouraged their education and independence, telling Elias that these girls had survived too much to be limited by conventional expectations. When Lena was 16, a new teacher arrived in Ridgeway looking for someone to help at the small schoolhouse that served the scattered ranch families. Lena applied for the assistant position and got it, becoming the youngest teacher's aide in the territory. She was natural with children, patient and creative, and she had a particular gift for reaching the ones who struggled or who came from difficult circumstances. "She sees them," Elias observed to Catherine one evening. "The invisible ones, the ones everyone else overlooks. She knows what that feels like." "That's her gift," Catherine agreed, turning pain into purpose. Bertie, at 14, began teaching music to the younger children in town. Her voice had only gotten more beautiful as she matured, and she could play piano, fiddle, and guitar with equal skill. She was gentler than Lena, more inclined to seek peace than confrontation, but she had a core of steel that surprised people who underestimated her. The years brought challenges, of course. There were hard winters and failed crops, illness and injury, and the normal conflicts that arose in any family. Lena and Bertie fought sometimes, usually over small things that masked larger anxieties. There were moments when the past came roaring back in nightmares or triggered by some innocent reminder, and Elias would hold whichever daughter needed holding and remind them that they were safe, that they were loved, that the past couldn't hurt them anymore. When Lena was 18 and Bertie 16, a formal inquiry arrived from Helena. The territorial government, responding to pressure from reformers, was conducting a comprehensive review of child welfare institutions. Someone had remembered the Grace Haven case and wanted testimony from survivors. Both girls decided to participate, traveling to Helena with Elias to tell their stories to a panel of officials and legislators. It was difficult, dredging up those memories and speaking them aloud to strangers. But when they finished, the lead investigator, an older woman with kind eyes, thanked them for their courage. "Because of what you've shared, we're drafting new laws to protect children in institutional care," she said. "You're helping make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others." On the way home, Lena was quiet, processing everything. Finally, she spoke. "Papa, I want to do more. I want to help children who don't have anyone to fight for them. I want to make a real difference." "You already make a difference every day," Elias replied. "I know, but I want to do more. I've been thinking about opening a home, a place for children who have nowhere else to go. Somewhere safe where they can heal and learn and just be children." She looked at him with determination burning in her eyes. "Would you help me?" Elias felt pride swell in his chest. "Of course I would, but it'll take time, money, planning." "I know, but we could do it. We could create something that actually helps instead of hurts." Bertie leaned forward from the back of the wagon. "I want to help too. We could teach them music and art, give them beauty to balance out the ugly they've seen." And so began a new chapter. Over the next 3 years, working with Catherine's connections and Daniel Walsh's legal expertise, they established the Crow Home for Children on a piece of property adjacent to Elias's land. It started small, just enough room for 6 children, but it was built on principles of kindness, respect, and genuine care. Children came to them through various channels: orphaned by disease, abandoned by families too poor to care for them, removed from abusive situations by marshals and social reformers. Lena ran the day-to-day operations with a combination of compassion and firm boundaries. Bertie handled the music and art programs, helping children express emotions they couldn't put into words. Elias, now in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, served as the steady foundation, fixing things that broke, providing discipline when needed, and offering the kind of father figure many of these children had never known. The home earned a reputation throughout the territory as a place where broken children could become whole again. It wasn't always easy. Some children arrived so damaged by their experiences that healing seemed impossible. But Lena and Bertie understood that timeline of recovery better than anyone, and they never gave up on a child no matter how difficult the circumstances. One spring morning, when Elias was 54 and Lena 23, a young couple arrived at the home with their nephew, a 7-year-old boy whose parents had died in a mine collapse. The boy was silent and withdrawn, refusing to speak or make eye contact. The couple loved him but didn't know how to help him, and they'd heard about the Crow home from friends in Helena. Lena sat with the boy in the garden while the adults talked inside. She didn't push him to speak or force interaction. She just sat quietly, pulling weeds and talking softly about the plants growing around them. After an hour, the boy finally looked at her. "Why are you being nice to me?" he asked. "Because you deserve kindness. Everyone does, especially when they're hurting. My parents are dead. Nobody can fix that." "No, they can't. And I won't lie and tell you the pain will go away completely, but it gets easier to carry, and you don't have to carry it alone." The boy studied her with ancient eyes and a young face. "You sound like you know." "I do know. I lost my parents when I was about your age. I was alone and scared and didn't think anyone would ever care about me again. But I was wrong." She gestured toward the cabin where Elias stood watching through the window. "That man there? He saw me when I was invisible. He fought for me when nobody else would. And he taught me that family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people who choose to love you anyway." The boy was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you think someone could choose to love me?" "I think someone already has," Lena said gently. "Your aunt and uncle brought you here because they love you. And if you decide to stay for a while, we'll love you too. That's what we do here." He stayed, and slowly, over weeks and months, he began to heal. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The Crow home became a beacon for lost children across Montana, a place where the unwanted became treasured and the broken became whole. Elias watched his daughters work with those children and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd ever known. He thought often about that day in Dustfall Crossing when he'd almost walked away, almost told himself it wasn't his problem. How different everything would have been if he'd chosen indifference over action. Lena would probably be dead by now, another forgotten casualty of a world that didn't care about children with no one to fight for them. Bertie would still be suffering at Grace Haven or someplace worse, and he would still be running, empty and alone, slowly dying inside. But he hadn't walked away. He'd stopped. He'd fought. He'd chosen courage over comfort, and that choice had changed everything. On a warm evening in late summer, when Elias was 58 and feeling every year in his creaking joints, he sat on the porch of the main house watching the children play in the yard. Lena was teaching a group of them a game, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Bertie sat under a tree with her guitar, surrounded by younger children learning songs. The sun painted everything in shades of gold, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers and possibility. Lena broke away from the game and came to sit beside him. She was a woman now, strong and capable and impossibly beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with character. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am. How different my life could have been." "You made your life what it is, Papa. You chose this." "We chose this," he corrected, "all of us together." Bertie joined them, settling on Elias's other side. For a moment, they simply sat there, the three of them, watching children who'd been given second chances learn how to be children again. "Do you ever regret it?" Bertie asked quietly. "Taking us on? Your life would have been simpler without us." Elias put an arm around each of his daughters and pulled them close. "Simpler, maybe, but emptier, meaningless. You two gave me back my life. You gave me a reason to be brave when I wanted to hide. You taught me that love is stronger than grief, and that family is something you build, not something you're born with." "We learned that from you," Lena said. "No, we learned it from each other." They sat until the sun set and the stars emerged, three people who'd been broken by loss and remade by love. The children gradually headed inside for supper, their voices floating back on the evening air. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new children who needed help, new battles to fight against a world that was often cruel to those who couldn't defend themselves. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was family. And Elias Crow, who'd once been a haunted drifter running from grief, was finally, completely home. Years later, when Elias was an old man with white hair and gentle eyes, people would come from miles around to hear him speak about the Crow home and the work they did there. They wanted to know the secret, the formula for turning pain into purpose and broken children into thriving adults. His answer was always the same, simple and profound. You stop. When you see someone suffering, you stop. You don't tell yourself it's not your problem or that someone else will help. You stop and you do what you can, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, because that's what love requires. Not grand gestures or perfect solutions, but the courage to stop running and start caring. The Crow Home for Children continued long after Elias passed peacefully in his sleep at 72, surrounded by both his daughters and a room full of children and grandchildren who called him Grandpa Eli. Lena and Bertie ran it for another 30 years, eventually training a new generation to carry on the work. The home helped hundreds of children over the decades, giving them what Elias had given Lena that day in Dustfall Crossing, a chance to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. And every child who passed through those doors learned the story of how it all began. They learned about a man who'd lost everything and a girl who'd been abandoned by everyone. They learned about courage and compassion and the transformative power of a single choice to stop running and start caring. They learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love. That broken people can heal each other. That one person stopping to help one child can change the world in ways that ripple outward forever. And they learned that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. That was the legacy of Elias Crow and his daughters. Not a legacy of perfection or easy answers, but something far more valuable. A legacy of showing up, of fighting for the forgotten, of building family from fragments and hope from heartbreak. It was a legacy that began with a single moment of courage in a forgotten saloon, when a broken man looked at an invisible child and decided that she mattered, that he mattered, that they could matter to each other. And from that moment, everything changed.